Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Leyton.
And my name is Therun.
And essentially, this podcast series will cover and dissect different elements of Asian films. We may have a couple celebrity guests appear every once in a while, you never know. But in terms of just breaking down our name, so PinoLanka Files, it sounds kind of funny, right? Well, ethnically, Therun is Sri Lankan, so that's where the Lanka part comes from. And I'm half Filipino, so that's where the Pino comes from. And we didn't want to do Lanka Pinophiles, because Pinophiles, by itself, kind of sounds like pedophiles, and we don't want our podcast to have that kind of reputation going forward. So, hope you enjoy. Bless you. Well, since you sneezed, that's kind of what we're going to talk about. The movie that we will cover this week is Chu. It's a Taiwanese film that was released in 2020. So what are your kind of like initial thoughts on the movie?
So, I generally think it was an interesting film due to the fact that it blended a mix of different genres. Mainly the genres of action, a little bit of comedy, and also romance.
Yeah, it does that pretty well. I mean, the intro scene, is this like kind of quirky comic book style like action shots. I just thought it was an interesting way to kind of set up the movie. I don't think the movie's incredible. Like 1 through 10, what would you give this movie?
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I would give it a 6 out of 10. The reason I say that is because overall, like, it was enjoyable to watch, but the main complaint I have is that there wasn't much substance with the film itself. I feel as if it didn't really reach its full potential when it came to being an action film or being a comedy film or a romance film. It had like a lot of things it could have worked with, sure, but it just didn't really reach its full potential, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would almost completely agree with you. I'd probably take it a notch lower and give it just a 5 out of 10. It was very much just a movie. Look, there were some cool aspects of it, of course, like some of the action shots, the training montages were pretty cool. The narrative, for me, at least from an American perspective, just wasn't really there.
And like, I totally agree on you. Because thinking about like Western films, especially like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, their narratives are so compelling and it's so highly detailed, and you could tell that these stories had a lot of thought put into it. When you go to like and look at Chu, for instance, though, you see that the narrative isn't as substantial, or it's not as baked as other Western films, and it's kind of sad to see because overall the story in and of itself is pretty interesting, at least in my opinion. I think the idea of this guy who wants to be a superhero but doesn't have the ability to because he's not born with any powers, it's a really good like setup, and I think they could have done a lot with that.
I mean, yeah, he brings an interesting perspective. It's what people like to see. I mean, if you look at let's do a nice old throwback and talk about Sky High, the main character, the high school student. His parents have powers, all his friends. He goes to a high school with everyone has superpowers but him, and he sort of has to deal with that challenge, mentally and physically, because all these guys, they got fire or ice powers, or in this case, Flash with his lightning powers and Sonic with his sonic powers. I mean, they didn't have the greatest names, so let's be honest here. And he kind of got to, fight as like an underdog, and he does that through boxing, and then he eventually, perseveres. But the initial narrative is interesting. I just feel like that they didn't make it in a compelling enough manner.
Yeah, so then in your opinion, what do you think the movie directors and writers could have done to probably improve the film? Because I think of The Flash, and I think maybe they should have ingrained him more in the story, more than the mentor that he is for our protagonist. And I think they should have given him more character, because we understand in the story that he is this superhero that used to defend the city, and then he now just sits dormant. And I feel like they could have added more to him as a character, especially because at the end of the story, he goes and he fights the Cube in defense of everyone. And even though like he's weak in this stage of his life, he still actively becomes a superhero, even though like he literally can't be anymore. And I feel like it didn't really hit me as much as it would have if they had given him more like screen time and more just character and story.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I think origin is very important in a superhero film, and this movie doesn't really establish that much at all with any of their characters. With Wang Yichi, he's at an orphanage. His parents didn't die because of Dr. Cube. They just kind of disappeared mysteriously, which sort of drives his character, but not quite, because they never really explain it. But I think a really cool way they could have opened the movie outside of that comic book little intro animation is they show him as a child, and we see lightning in the background. Like, lightning strikes. Maybe Flash even kills his parents, but we don't know that until it's revealed later on in the movie. Just something to tie in the Flash and Wang Yichi from, like, the moment he was born. And because they do talk about fate quite a bit. Like, fate was the reason that he was in this moment at this time in order to save Shinshin and all the other orphans. And I don't think that they really necessarily talk about fate enough or use it appropriately for this story.
Yeah, and going back to Western films, I think of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And I think about the fact that we get to see his coming of, like, becoming a superhero. And we get to see him being bitten by a spider. And we see the death of Uncle Ben. And we understand why Peter Parker and why he as Spider-Man is the way he is. Because we get to visually see and understand why he does the things he does, and like it shows who he is as a superhero, and we see his morals in that sense.
At the end of the day, this isn't written as well as Spider-Man was written. Of course, there's a variety of factors. I mean, Peter Parker was written as a character like decades ago, by Stan Lee and Marvel Comics, and they've had several adaptations. And not every Spider-Man film has been great. I'll give you that. But every single one of them has been better than Chu was. And that's no real jab at the creators. They put a lot of time and effort into it. Cinematography is pretty cool. The editing is pretty good for the film. But it lacks that bit of relatability to an American audience. And a lot of superhero movies that are filmed in the U.S. or produced by U.S. companies don't really miss that. They understand that the main objective of a superhero movie is to humanize these characters. Because no one wants to see a Superman film where he just destroys everyone, has no real issues, no moral quandaries, no stakes. We want to see stakes, and this movie doesn't deliver it in an appropriate manner, really, until the very end when he sacrifices himself. But the sacrifice doesn't even feel that legitimate in my eyes. It feels like a cop-out to sort of show that true love wins above all, but does he really love Shinshin? I'm not actually sure. I actually think he more so loves the idea of Shinshin than actually her. I mean, we see sort of these weird little scenes where they're supposed to establish that they have a connection with each other, but it never really feels authentic. This, of course, could just be an acting problem. Like, maybe the actors just don't have great chemistry with each other. Or it could be a script problem, like the script wasn't written well enough. But I also think that when we look at a lot of these romance themed films, or in this case action hero film with romantic elements, they never really talk or write romance in a realistic way. It's always the hero saves the woman, the damsel in distress, and it's sort of the case again here. Even though he doesn't really have powers, they sort of fabricate this idea that even the working man, the boxing guy, always gets the shit beat out of him. Let's be honest here. He gets the shit beat out of him, but he can still save the girl, and he still gets her above someone who's a little bit flashier. In an American rom-com, it might be someone who makes $500,000 a year as a corporate lawyer, but in this case, it's a literal superhero, someone who can save the world, and he just kind of refuses to at the end for logic reasons. I mean, what do you think?
I 100% agree with you. And going back to Chu, I specifically think one of the main things that they point out in the film was that she really likes a guy who's very brave and strong. And that was one of the main takeaways you get from the movie. And it really sucks how that's basically the drive to Wang Yichi's desire to be a boxer and to be a superhero. And although later on in the film, they try to retcon that and try to make Wang Yiqi be a superhero and be a boxer, not for her sake, later on. But like when you establish that in the beginning of the film, and it kind of seems like basically from the beginning of the film to until that confrontation between Wang Yiqi and Shishi, you kind of get that sense of Wang Yiqi is just being a superhero, being a boxer, just to win over Shishi's heart. And it genuinely doesn't make sense how they just like kind of change that towards the end, right before the main, fight scene. And overall, like, yeah, I feel like they just could have done better with that.
That's some odd music. I think it's time for a new section of the podcast. Rory, how about you take it away?
So I want to begin the Rory Corner section today by discussing a story from a couple centuries ago, and its title is Clisson et Eugene, or Clisson and Eugene. And the story is about this French heroic revolutionary, and he goes and he wins this acclaim and this glory, and he's very courageous and that sort of thing. And he comes across this woman named Eugene, and they fall in love, and they have some kids, and he goes to war, and then a soldier is sent to basically watch over Eugene, now Clisson's wife, and the soldier seduces her, and Clisson finds out about this, and he decides that he is simply going to, prove his worth to her by fighting more gloriously in battle than he ever has before, and by eventually sacrificing himself at the front of a head-on charge into the enemy. Okay? Now, the reason why I bring this up is because it was actually written by a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte, and he wanted to burn every manuscript of it that he could, because at the time, that is, in the 1790s and the early 1800s, it itself was felt to be a little cliche in repeating some of these same romantic tropes. Some of these were influenced by folks like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We later see these sort of influences in literature throughout the Romantic era under folks like Tolstoy, albeit in different ways and in critical ways. But the reason why I bring this up is because we take the story of Achu. It, like Clisson and Eugene, it takes one of the dominant themes of the time, and in this case it's superhero films and comics and that sort of thing, much in the same way that much of the sort of vocabulary that was used at the time of Clisson and Eugene's writing was that of revolution and building new worlds and all these sorts of things. And there's a few problems off the start. The first being that in trying to mesh together all of these different types of genres, be they romance and drama and superhero and action and comedy and whatnot, it doesn't really have an intercoherence or congruency to it. The sum of its parts, in my view, are not greater than its whole. These different parts happen in different sections, but it gives the appearance of kind of going through cable and flashing through different channels and seeing Love Actually meshed in with I don't know, whatever's on the CW at a given point in time, whether that's The Flash or whatever. But going back to the main point here, what is fundamentally present in the story itself, what the story actually is a love story. And it's a somewhat childish and patriarchal one at that. This idea that, through simple, sheer effort, and, exertion of one's will over their environment, in this case, having the protagonist get the ever-living crap kicked out of him time and time and time again, the guy who can't be defeated but, or be knocked out, as it were, but that, still kind of loses, that he'll be able to win over the heart of his lover, But as previously noted, this is itself a very shallow, meeting between the two. It is something that is childish, and it never outgrows that childishness, or, and I think this is the most damning part of it, it never becomes aware of it. So what we see, is a story that has been told in many times before. It's old wine in a new bottle, but the bottle itself isn't even holding all together that well. So with that is the end of the Rory Corner. Thank you for listening.
Well, thanks, Rory, for that splendid little segment. Normally we would maybe talk a little bit more, but I think that last 4-minute segment kind of wrapped it up perfectly. So, yeah, we'll have new episodes every week. Maybe include other celebrities or guests. Hugh Jackman might pop on once in a while. But, start off with a sneeze. Might as well end with a sneeze. So, Therun, if you do the honors.